So the next topic that we're going to discuss is a few more points about what to think about when you're doing papers. The first thing you might want to worry about is what kind of software you should use to prepare a scientific paper. Of course, many of you probably have experience using Microsoft Word or something like that. It's actually easier as you begin to increase the number of figures you work with, the number of equations you use, to try and use LaTeX, which is a scientific typesetting software. But it's really kind of overwhelming to get started on that full blower. But fortunately, there's this new website called overleaf.com that's a bit like Google Docs, except it allows you to write the things that you co-edit there together with any collaborators you share this document with in LaTeX. And the amazing thing is they have templates for lots of different scientific journals. So for this class, you can open up the Geophysical Research Letters journal template and just start typing, and it'll make your article, your paper, look just like it was in the full journal, which is cool. If you want, you can even click the submit the result button, and it will go straight to the journal with one click. All right. So a few things that usually come up right at the beginning. It's best to use the passive voice. I measured T instead of T was measured. T was measured is the appropriate scientific language. I measured T is something that you might write in like a lab report, but as we're trying to get used to writing this kind of style, passive voice is what you want. Don't worry that you didn't get as far as you want to, or as you're making your plans, don't plan to go farther than you think you're going to get to. Next time around, you'll be much more ready. Remember, this first project is largely a debugging exercise. There won't be that many citations used this time around. 2 to 4 is probably okay. You know, we talked about 5 to 10 is typical for these papers, but this first one, you might only find 1 or 2 that's really directly applicable. But you're going to want to think about how to find more, and a good place to add more is in the introduction, which is like if they're broad survey papers that cover the region you're thinking about, or the conclusion if there are other papers that inspired you as a method, but you didn't really use their results, you just kind of linked up against them. That's actually a good place to build in a greater span of the cited work. The reasons why you would want to cite other papers is, one, to strengthen the grounding for your readers, but 2, you're also often citing the work of people who are working in this field right now, and so by citing their work, you can get their attention for your paper. What's the difference between an abstract and an introduction? This is also something that's very confusing to people as they write this first paper. So the abstract has a different audience and a different purpose than the introduction. The abstract is the only thing you get to see from a paper besides the title and the authors without going through a paywall normally. So the abstract is free and clear to anyone who is browsing the content of the journal that your paper ultimately appears in. By contrast, the introduction is the first thing that a reader who is paid to see your paper, or someone who's gone the extra step of downloading the PDF beyond the abstract, which is linked normally on the journal webpage, gets to see. So the audience for an abstract is much wider, and the purpose of the abstract is much narrower. The abstract is just supposed to say, what's the method you took? What results did you find? In some sense, it's just exploding the title into a little bit more conclusive set of ideas. The introduction is a much wider discussion about things like, what's the motivation for this work? What other literature is worth considering in this broad field, or even this narrow field, or this region? And for those who have never read a paper before in the field, the introduction introduces. So the expert reader of your paper might not be very interested at all in the introduction. They might just skim through the introduction or just jump over it and go straight to the methods section and the results section. But they would be very interested in the abstract, because that's where they'll learn very quickly what your method and your results are. Whereas the person who is just trying to figure out what your paper is about might not understand anything about your method and might not understand why they should appreciate your results, and so they would read the introduction to get a sense as to what the paper's about. So even though both of these are kind of opening aspects of a paper, they really have very different roles. So as you go to write an abstract, as you go to write an introduction, think a little bit about what you're trying to do. And as we go along, one of the common peer review comments will be, oh, this sentence really should be in the abstract, not the introduction, or this sentence should be in the introduction, not the abstract. A lot of people are confused a bit because a typical academic paper starts with an introduction, not with an abstract. And so you may want to warm up the audience the way you would in an introduction in the first one or two sentences of the abstract. You actually don't need to do that. Those first two sentences can go in the introduction. The abstract just jumps right in, like, we used the such and such method, or the such and such method was used, the results obtained were bing, bing, bing. Got it? Thanks. Next one. Peer reviews. You may be starting to think, maybe, about what your peer reviews are going to look like, how you're going to do them, what to do with them. So there is a peer review primer, which I hope you will read through as you're getting ready to do your peer reviews. But I thought it's helpful right now to kind of comment about what you can expect from the peer reviews and what they're going to say. So remember, where the plans are due on Wednesday, the paper is due not this upcoming Saturday, but the following Saturday. And so you're going to get the comments back pretty soon afterwards. I think by Sunday, late Sunday is when I say. So when you're peer reviewing, our peer reviews are not anonymous. You will be able to see who your reviewers are. That's different from most scientific journals, and the reason why is partly because people will figure it out, but partly because Canvas actually gives you more features if you don't stay anonymous. So those two pieces come together. So whether or not you're anonymous, you should definitely stay polite in a peer review. You don't need to say, this is terrible, I don't understand what you mean, that kind of thing. Instead, you want to frame your comments in a sense of constructive criticism. On the other hand, saying, looks awesome, really good, nothing to suggest, is not actually a terribly helpful comment. It's nice to point out which pieces of the paper you thought were effective, like, this figure does its job very well, you should not change it or not delete it. That's a good comment. But like, overall everything's great is not actually a very effective critique. So I really like how I think you could do better with, are good starting points for making helpful comments. In response to the peer review, there's also the response primer document, which you can take a look at. You're not going to actually take every suggestion that the reviewers suggest, but you will have to justify why not. And so they may say, oh, put section 2 in place of section 1 and section 1 in place of section 2, and you could say that you don't think that that's going to improve the format and it would be a lot of work, therefore you choose not to do it. That's fine. For sure in this context, but also in the real scientific review process, this may bring up a lot of emotions for you. It may bring up a lot of emotions for the peer reviewers. There's definitely issues of fairness. There's definitely issues of how much you have time to do, and you're going to make excuses because you don't think you have time to consider things that they suggest. That's going to be true of every scientific paper. Perfection is not the goal here. What's the goal is really an accurate milestone on the long, long, long path to the truth. And so your description of that work is meant to just bring everyone up to where you are and allow them to move on. And if you can't get quite as far as you wanted to, that affects where your milestone is placed, but it doesn't actually mean that you haven't still made progress. So those are important concepts to keep in mind. We can discuss more in class, of course, but I thought this was a useful time to remind people, because I'm sure your minds are starting to turn to what comes next.